Thank you for joining us today for our session on safeguarding. Well, we'll be looking specifically at changes in the 2022 Keeping Children Safe in Education. We're pleased to have those of you who joined us already, and while the numbers are going up, we'll look at some housekeeping issues. Thanks. Thanks ever so much for attending. As I said, the session is being recorded and we'll share out handouts, slides and a link to the recording after the event so that you can share them with other people who may not be able to attend today. This event is CPD accredited. If you would like a certificate, we need to get your consent to share your data. Please fill in the survey that will pop up at the end of the session, and then we can get a certificate sent out. Normally takes about 20 days, up to 28 days for you to receive that certificate. If you have any questions during the session, and we hope you do, please do put them into the Q&A function and we'll endeavour to get to as many of them as possible at the end. Finally, we'd like to thank the Institute of Engineering and Technology who sponsored this event. We're really delighted to have had their support over the 2 days. Thank you. The numbers are still going up at the moment, so hold for one moment. It's a very, very popular session. Okay, we'll make a start. Well, numbers are still going up, but we'll make a start. Hello and welcome to the safeguarding session. As I said, I'm pleased to be joined by Katherine Howard, who's the safeguarding specialist at Smoothwall. Katherine is also school governor. Smoothwall develop technology and solutions to ensure the safety and well-being of young people online, and that's very much the focus of this session. We'll be sharing information about digital safeguarding, as I said, particularly with Keeping Children Safe in Education 2022 in mind. As I've already said, if you do have any questions, please do put them into the Q&A and we'll get to as many as possible. But for now, I'll hand over to you, Katherine.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, as Hannah says, my name's Kat Howard. I'm head of safeguarding here at Smoothwall. So what we're going to do is I'll just move on to the next slide, if that's okay. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about keeping children safe in education, but specifically around the digital elements of safeguarding that you need to be aware of as a school governor, and some of the things that will hopefully enable you to be more aware of some of the safeguarding in the digital environment requirements that us as school governors need to be more aware of, and also to be able to challenge the safeguarding provisions you have in your establishment. So next slide, please. So we are going to be talking about safeguarding in general. If you are concerned about any of the things that we talk about during this workshop, please make sure that you're speaking to your safeguarding lead within your school, your DSL, within your college or your institution that you are a governor of. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are our bread and butter when it comes to protecting and looking after our young people in both the physical and the digital environment. Obviously, working together to safeguard children is a really important document. I would recommend all of us as school governors do have a look at that. The School Inspection Handbook has been updated as of July, so if you are wanting to look at how your safeguarding provision as a school in general can become more robust, I would strongly recommend you point that out to your SLT within your school. It's not about those Ofsted inspections, it's not about tick box exercises or anything about like that. It is about making sure that we are doing the best for our young people, and in that document there are an awful lot of really helpful aspects that yes, they will be looking at during Ofsted, but more importantly you can get those things in place to safeguard and make sure that your provision for your young people is as robust as possible. Keeping Children Safe in Education has been in place since the 1st of September this year. That document, we're going to go through some of the changes that have specifically occurred during this academic year. And obviously we've got Prevent. Now, with all of those pieces of legislation working hand in glove, you're going to have within your institution a very, very robust, hopefully very, very robust safeguarding provision overall. And one of the things to mention is that safeguarding also includes in the digital environment, so your online safety elements as well. So the two are very much together. They are not separate as they were previously a long time ago. They are very much safeguarding, but safeguarding in the digital environment. Next slide, please. So let's have a quick look. Obviously, all staff in your school, you have to have knowledge as a governor and confidence that all staff have read that section 1. As a school governor, you should also be up to date with what is in KCSIE. So what I abbreviate of Keeping Children Safe in Education to is KCSIE. Obviously, this does apply, and it has been made very clear in this situation that this also applies to all post-16 establishments. It also talks that and about how you as a school are actually recognising that some children might not feel comfortable coming forward to identify or to share their safeguarding concerns with you. So what as a school are you doing to make sure that children have a safe space in your schools to be able to have that kind of open discussion with members of your safeguarding team? Lots of schools and multi-academy trusts and local authorities that I work with at the moment, we're looking at this and trying to make sure that students have that opportunity to come forward and speak to somebody at any point, but also that they feel that they're not having to recount the potential issue, or that they're going to be asked to recount the incident multiple times, because we know that that can also cause kind of damage and upset to that young person on multiple occasions if they're being asked to recount that particular incident on a regular basis. Obviously, the PHSE curriculum and the inclusion of domestic abuse, and also making sure that you are aware of what your school is doing to make sure that, and to talk about domestic abuse through the curriculum, through what you're doing with parents, sharing information around that particular area as well. It also, within the document, also includes that information that governors should receive appropriate safeguarding and child protection training, including online. What I would say to you in relation to that is that it should not just be a one-hit wonder. It shouldn't just be an online course that you do and amazing, jazz hands, you sorted. It needs to be regular and consistent, because hopefully what you're going to get from today is just to understand just how quickly this particular demographic, this area of digital safeguarding actually moves at a pace. So some of the things that you might be aware of, some of the apps that maybe you use, some of the children will be exposed to varying different ones, and the skill sets that children need to be able to successfully navigate those are really important. And you need to have an understanding as to some of their worries, some of their concerns, some of their issues, maybe going in as a governor and actually sitting with the children, listening to them from things like the school councils, listening and meeting with your school councils on a regular basis to understand their concerns, to make sure that your curriculum, not only for yourself, but also for all pillars of your community, is robust. And I'm going to explore that in a bit more detail as we go through. Additional resources relating to safeguarding have been added. So the brackets, just to be clear, the brackets that are after all of these quotes are direct numbers that have been taken out of KCSIE 2022. So if you actually want to go through and see the actual quotations out from the document, just use your KCSIE document and go to the number that we've put on here. So additional resources for things like nudes and semi-nudes. Some of you might remember that we used to call that the term sexting. So we call it youth-produced sexual imageries or nudes and semi-nudes now. There's also an awareness that you need to have in relation to what filtering and monitoring you have within your institution, and also that those are checked on a regular basis. I'm going to go into a bit more detail about that in a few minutes, but the key thing is that you should not overblock, you should not stop the curriculum. So if a child needs to be able to look for resources or information on the internet to support a curriculum topic such as drugs or mental health and well-being, they should be able to explore those particular topics, but with some filtering and monitoring. And we're going to talk about the difference of those as we go through. As a governor, you need to make sure that consistent and regular touch points are made to all of your, what I call whole school community. So your parents, you guys as governors, your students, and also your staff. Because, as I said, this is an ever-changing kind of system that our children are accessing. So regular communication with parents, and a lot of the work that I do with local authorities in multi-academy trusts, we know that children will actually come forward and say, I want my mum and dad, I want the person that looks after me to actually know a little bit more about this particular environment, to be able to support me, because they feel that they don't necessarily have that support mechanism both at home and potentially at school. Next slide, please. So one of the other things you'll see on 1.1 is also around the escalation of concerns. I mean, comfortable that your IT systems, and when I talk about your IT systems, I mean all of your IT systems, iPads, tablets, laptops, desktops, all of your devices are protected, and we're going to explore that in a little bit more detail. The next one is around identifying young people who are LGBT+, who maybe are being maybe bullied, maybe harassed, and digital monitoring can obviously assist with that, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. The rest that you see on there are additional resources and additional materials that have been added to the document relating to safeguarding, and there was a fantastic workshop done by some colleagues that are at Governors for Schools that if you want to know more about some of the significant changes that aren't in relation to the digital element, you can attend the webinar recording that we will, that Governors for Schools will share with you following on from the session. Next slide, please. So let's just have a look at what a best practice approach is for your individual institution, and you will get access to all of these slides following on from the session. Obviously that whole school approach is absolutely vital, so actually it being led by the leadership in the school, the governors backing and supporting the leadership within the school to be able to make safeguarding, especially the online safeguarding, really a priority across all curriculum areas, across the school, across the community. What is the school's digital footprint? So we know that Ofsted inspectors will see what is out there about the school prior to inspection to see whether parents have put grievances on various social media sites or put it into forums. And if you as a school are not aware of those things, then we need to take ownership of our digital profile as a school institution as well. Obviously that all staff reading that keeping children safe in education, and us as governors. Engaging the whole school, we've already kind of talked about parents, governors, staff and students, the 4 pillars of your community, making sure that they're completely aware of that. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about filtering and monitoring, but as a governor, you should be completely aware of what filtering and monitoring systems you have in school. They should be tested on a regular basis, and you should get a report to say they have been successfully tested and that they do work on all the systems, and that both staff and students, both of those communities, the information is being picked up and shared back, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Accredited online safety training, regular communication of online safety incidences should be sent to the governors. So not the detail, but in general, how many incidences have we had around things like peer-on-peer abuse? How many incidences have we had around things like online bullying, for example? And then the key thing that we can then say is, okay, so what have we done about this? And the great thing about looking at data sets and the data of these types of things is you can then think about when and how you're going to use your curriculum to be able to hopefully nib some of this in the bud. So if cyberbullying, for example, is something that's happening predominantly in, let's say, September, are you doing workshops around and lessons around it, particularly to engage children about that during that time? Are you talking to parents about that particular types of behaviours around that time that these peaks and troughs of behaviours are taking place? Your school-based reporting, so do you have a very clear workflow of how these things are escalated when children have got concerns, or maybe they raise them on platforms, or maybe you filter and monitor and pick them up? Report abuse, so where children are experiencing issues, how do you utilise your school website to actually direct parents to resources to be able to report content that maybe the child has seen, or maybe they've been groomed or something like that has happened online? How do parents do that when your school is shut? How do they get that particular report or that incident into the right hands? So having the CEOP, so Child Exploitation and Online Protection Agency button on your website, and the Report Harmful Content, which is RHC, the Report Harmful Content button on your website can support parents to be able to actually report incidences that maybe happen outside of a school day in the summer holidays. So think about how you utilise your actual website itself. All stakeholders, you need to be completely comfortable that everyone within your school institution can report and knows how to report those incidences. And that comes from some of the training that might take place in your school to make sure that everybody has received that. And also that they are more importantly, applying what they have learned. So how do you know that during that training session they've learned what you need them to learn? So things like surveys can be really, really helpful to actually gather that intelligence from your community to make sure that and check actually that they understand what's happened. Regular reviews of online safety reports, so those reports coming through to you as governors so that you can make that informed kind of support of the school and kind of actively challenge what has gone on within those incidences. Next slide, please. Policies and procedures, obviously they are all ratified by us as governors, but a lot of us will read some of those policies and might not necessarily understand maybe some of the terminology or some of the actual meaning behind some of these policies, and that's really, really important. So think and look at what is actually in your documentation. Think about your code of conduct for your staff, making sure that that's reviewed on a regular basis, and also your acceptable use policies for students. The number of schools that I go in, I went into a school not so very long ago where their acceptable use policy for students actually had children will not bring floppy disk drives into school. Well, I can't actually remember the last time I used a floppy disk drive. So, you know, making sure that they're fit for purpose, making sure that they're appropriate. Thinking about your child and child policy, thinking about your child protection policy, all of that working together. Then we come on to the education of your children. How do you know that actually the education from an online safeguarding perspective, your PHSE, your computing curriculum, the online safety curriculum is as robust as it possibly can be? Is it giving children the skills to be able to navigate some of these issues and incidences that they might be encountering within that digital environment? So I've put some notes on here, but one of the key things is that education for a connected world framework. If you are working with your teaching and learning committees, you're talking to your schools and kind of asking the questions around what are we doing to educate our children. This is a brilliant framework for schools to use, linked to a great resource called Project Evolve that gives schools a really great kind of broad curriculum, giving children the actual skills they need to navigate some of these what in some cases can be very complex issues for young people around things like privacy and security, copyright and ownership, digital reputation, digital relationships. So lots and lots of things for them to completely build an actual skill sets around the digital environment as well. Next slide, please. So I've talked a bit about filtering, I've talked a little bit about monitoring, but lots of people when I talk about this haven't got a clue what it is. So let's just expand on that a little bit. So filtering, I'm not a technical person, I'm an educationalist. I will explain it in layman's terms because that's what I am. I'm also a layman, not a technical person. But basically the filtering is the wall. So when you log in as a student, for example, and maybe you're searching for something that could be considered. So if you're searching for things like porn, for example, we wouldn't want a child to be able to access porn within the environment. It's a pretty kind of standard observation. But what you should get is that ability for the computer to say, actually, you can't access this content. So that's what the filter is. The filter is a wall, which means the children can't actually access it. Now, one of the things that I always talk to schools on about is, you know, how do you make sure that actually the children can access what they need to access in order to do the curriculum, but also with that kind of confines of we want to make sure that children are safe and, you know, and things like that. If you are a governor of a primary school, lots of primary schools have what we call a generic logon. So all the children will have logons that they can just put in, I don't know, year 6 and the word password, and they're straight into the computer. If somebody, let's say little Johnny, types in porn, one of the problems or searches for something, one of the problems is that you can't identify the actual student that has typed in maybe that issue or typed in that particular search term. So that's where some of these things you need to think about the rationale around making sure that when these things are triggered, so when that report comes through to a DSL, and that's another thing to say, is that DSL should be getting the filtering and the monitoring reports, because we know that about 1/3 of the actual warning markers, some of the things that children will search for, some of the things that children will do online, can be a serious safeguarding concern. So bear that in mind. So filtering the wall, not letting certain types of content be visible to the students. Next slide, please. The second one is monitoring, and every school needs to have both filtering and monitoring on their system. So monitoring sits on top of you all, sits over here, and it looks at the individual device and what the young person is doing on there, and it just sits there until either a child types something in or it searches for something. Now that young person might be on their laptop, they might have had, you know, a challenging week or whatever. They might be in a Word document. They might put, I can't cope, delete, 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 delete. A good monitoring system will pick that up and will escalate that back to the DSL and say, you know, Katherine Howard typed in, I can't cope, into a PowerPoint presentation, and then the DSL can action that. So this is why it's really important for you to understand why and what filtering you have, the wall, and also check how useful and robust that particular filtering system is. But also that it works on all devices that you have in the institution. So lots of schools may buy iPads, they may have a complete broad variety of different types of devices, and both filtering and monitoring need to work on both sets of devices, on all sets of devices that you have. Lots of schools that I work with will also build ICT development roadmaps, so what you're going to be spending your cash on, your capital money in relation to actually devices in the school. So making sure that your filtering and monitoring meets those requirements of the technology that you have within the institution is absolutely vital. So really think about that and challenge that with regards to what devices you're buying, and more importantly, when they say these are the devices we want to buy, do we know, can we be completely confident that the filtering and monitoring actually works on those devices? We need to make sure that a DSL is getting really good data around filtering and monitoring to be able to add that to the physical safeguarding reports that are being given to the DSL by potentially other members of the staff as well. Monitoring that we do here at Smoothwall also has that additional layer of protection. So if Katherine Howard searches for something that's illegal or life-threatening, the school will get an immediate response, an immediate phone call to say 10 minutes ago, Katherine Howard put in, where's the nearest bridge to jump off, for example. We would be able to ring the school and say that is exactly what happens. Now, the great thing is we monitor 24/7, so we are there monitoring those devices. So even if a child takes a device home, especially with what happened over COVID, those devices will be monitored at whatever time that device is switched on. So real positive monitoring there, in that is actually taken back to the school and actually given to the DSL in relation to what a young person may have accessed. So every school needs to have filtering and monitoring. If you as a governor aren't aware as to the provider and what actually happens with your filtering and monitoring reports, I suggest that the reports from those go to a designated safeguarding lead, because they are the best people to be able to action what happens from a young person in relation to that. Some schools also have their ICT network manager on that as a group, and they also get the reports, but there may be incidences or areas where that might not be appropriate. So you as a school need to think about how those reports are actually going to be managed. And as I say, the key thing is that information is getting sent directly to the DSL to be able to be actioned appropriately. So filtering and monitoring. But as a governor, as I say, you need to have that confidence that both of them are in place and that they are being as effective as they possibly can be. So I always say to schools that you should review the effectiveness of it on a termly basis. So actually going in, not on your own, but if you are the safeguarding governor, working with the safeguarding lead in the school and actually testing how effective your filtering and monitoring reports are. If it's a great monitoring system, it will then integrate with other systems. Some of you might have heard of things like CPOMs, My Concern, Record Manager. These are all systems that allow a DSL to be able to drag the information all into one single central place and be able to action it appropriately. Great monitoring systems will be able to feed into those systems directly, so not adding an additional layer of complexity for designated safeguarding leads, but actually reducing time and effort for a DSL. Just to highlight that in 2021, we did spot a serious child at risk. We obviously monitor schools all over the country, but we actually spotted a student at serious risk every 5 minutes, which is quite concerning. But a lot of that has also been, has come from things like COVID, mental health and well-being, issues around some of the content they may see online, cries for help, also family circumstances, bereavement, cost of living, lots and lots of things that contribute to young people putting things into the digital environment that we need to be aware of as designated safeguarding leads. Next slide, please. So thinking about your training and why training is absolutely vital for schools, obviously regular up-to-date training is what is needed, that high quality of teaching and learning for students to be able to manage some of these incidences, that parents have been given that up-to-date IAG as information, advice and guidance, regular drip fed, as well as maybe a training session for them. The training sessions that I deliver, I do them for schools, and I do them once a term because, as I said, things move on a regular basis, and it's always useful to know about resources that can be very helpful for parents. How do you, as a governor, how do you intend to stay up to date with some of the things that are happening in that digital environment is something for you to reflect on. Are you getting some of that information via your safeguarding lead, but how are you trying to stay up to date? What technology do staff and students have access to, and what things will they have access to in the future based on your ICT roadmap? Thinking about that and making sure that all of those devices are covered. What types of risks are young people coming up against in that digital environment? Ask for that bit of information from your designated safeguarding leads. What are the things that are coming up in your institution, and what are we doing about it to be able to mitigate some of that risk for our young people? Do you know what intervention programs have been implemented based on the types of incidences that you've had? So have you been given those reports about this is the number of incidences, this is what we've done about it, this is the interventions we've put in place, and also how that reflects on with young people who are higher, more vulnerable, so the children that have things like SEND or that are lack. So, what are we doing to protect those young people? Next slide, please. Thinking about your policies, what I've done here is just put a few kind of key questions for you to think about following on from today. So have a look at those key questions and think about what you're doing from a policy perspective. Next slide, please. And what I've also done is just put a few kind of key questions together really for you to think about when it comes to going back into your institution. So some of the kind of questions around that accountability and online safety reputations, something around threats and harms. So are you up to date? Do you have an awareness of some of the risks and harms that young people are experiencing? Do you speak to those children through, as I say, things like safeguarding committees or online committees in general? That filtering and monitoring, do you completely understand how that works, what you've got in place and how those reports get to the right people, and also how the children are being trained and talked about in relation to all of this, the things that we've talked about today. So I've just given you a few kind of key questions. So next slide, please. So what I've done is I've also put you some resources here in relation to filtering and monitoring. So things that you can kind of ask, things that you can get further information of. I've also put are the systems effective? So you can test filtering. So there's a website called testfiltering.com that allows you to test the filtering that you have within the institution to make sure that it is appropriate for your institution. But what I've done, as I said, I've put some key questions for you to ask when you go back into your institution around some of the stuff that we've talked about this afternoon. Next slide, please. So there's an awful lot to take in, and I'm really sorry that we've got so much in such a very short space of time. But what we've also done is you can scan this QR code with your mobile phone if you want to access it right away, or we can send it when we send the presentation. You can click on it, and what we've done is we've done a guide for you around monitoring. So actually, what is monitoring and how does it work, and what are the things that we need to be aware of with regards to keeping children safe in education. So if you want to download the free guide, you'll just need to click on the QR code and we will send that through to you. If you want any further information about what I do or what my team do here at Smoothwall, please don't hesitate to contact us, and we'll be more than happy to support you and your school through the journey of hopefully improving your digital safeguarding practices in your institution. Next slide, please. So those are my details. If you want to contact me following on from today, that would be great. But I hope you found it useful. I know we've got a few questions that seem to be coming through, so I'll just pause for Hannah to point me in the direction of the questions, if that's okay.
So we do have loads of questions, Kat. I'm not sure we're going to get to them, but what we will do is we will answer any questions and send the answers out afterwards. There have been a couple of questions around, one around GDPR. Let me see if I can get that. Just clarifying how monitoring fits in with GDPR regulation.
Absolutely.
You need to monitor, but how does it fit?
Yeah, so in terms of GDPR, so with monitoring systems such as ours, we don't actually hold any data on students at all. All we have is their Active Directory, which is how they log onto the computer. So we don't actually know any personal information of the child at all. So we don't know anything about them, basically. So that's how that information and the actual information in terms of that data being sent to the school is actually all held by the school. So any personal information is held by the school. So that's how it fits with the GDPR. We don't actually hold any information around the students at all, or the staff.
Thank you. Another question around incidents being dealt with within safeguarding reports to governors. Would you expect to see aggregated data or references to specific incidents? Or both?
No, aggregated data.
Aggregated, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And is there a list of keywords or phrases that schools should be testing against? I think
absolutely. So yeah, that's all mentioned within KCSIE, within Keeping Children Safe in Education.
Brilliant. Well, we are a little bit over, so we will come to the rest of the questions, and I do promise we'll send out the responses to everybody so that you'll receive them. Thanks ever so much, Kat. It was really great, really interesting and informative. I've made lots of notes myself, so hopefully it was just as informative and interesting to everybody listening. Thanks ever so much to you all for attending. We have our second day of conference sessions tomorrow, and you can still sign up for any that you might be interested in. Thanks again to Smoothwall, and thank you for everybody. Have a lovely evening. Goodbye.
Take care, everyone.